Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Brazil once again and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel a couple of times before. So the last beers that I tried from this brewery were very nice. This brewery seems to be very highly regarded within the Brazilian craft beer scene and they do a lot of different styles. As I've told you previously, the Brazilian craft beer scene is thriving at the moment. There's lots of great things down there. So when I get the chance to try some new Brazilian beers, I always tend to jump at it. But the beer that we're going to have a look at today is a style that I very much enjoy and also a sub-style that's among my favourites actually. So when I saw that this brewery, who I know are very solid, had one available here in Sweden, I thought, we have to take a look at this and see what it's all about. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review. And as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Sao Paulo, which I guess is kind of the craft beer capital of Brazil these days. But we're going to have a look at another beer from Cervejaria or Cerveja Dádiva. So this particular beer is called True. It comes in at 10% ABV and they're describing this one as an American oak and coffee Russian Imperial Stout. Now I will point out as well that there are a few different batches of this beer. I believe they're at batch number 4. This one is batch number 2. So I think this beer was maybe canned a little bit over a year ago, but it's an Imperial Stout. We don't have to care too much about that. I'm sure it will be in good condition. But as you know, if you've watched the channel for any length of time, I love Imperial coffee stouts and we've had some great ones from Brazil over the last few years actually, so this should be a very nice one to try. So hopefully, as I say, it makes for an interesting review. Let's crack on with this one and see what we have. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Cervejaria Dádiva before, and we will no doubt return to these guys at some point in the near future. There's all the usual social media down there. And if you do want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and you can of course go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on geography. The channel has that geography based tagging system so you can find stuff from across the world, and you can of course check out the playlist of beers from different countries, and you will find this one in the Brazilian playlist. So yeah, let's crack on then and chat a little bit about Cervejaria Dádiva. So Cervejaria Dádiva, not sure exactly how to refer to them. As I mentioned though, this company are based in Sao Paulo down in Brazil, and the company was founded back in 2014 by Luisa Lili Tolosa and Victor Pereira Marinho. So Luisa was apparently inspired by her father to get into the craft beer market. She later studied business and then worked for an NGO, but she just really wanted to kind of do something on her own and start her own company. But her father actually asked his cousin about the craft beer scene, and he chatted with Luisa, and then she ended up setting up Cerveja Dádiva when she was only 26. But Victor had been brewing for a number of years and previously trained as a brewer at the Instituto de Cerveja Brasil, and the ICB as it's known for short, and he consulted with the company in the early days but later joined as a full partner, and that was quite early on in the company's history, I'll point out. But these days Victor and Luisa are a romantic couple, so it is a husband and wife operation at Cerveja Dádiva, and I do apologise for any bad pronunciations in this video. Portuguese is a language that I am not familiar with. But the brewery itself is based in Várzea, Paulista, and at present they have a 2,000 litre brew kit, and they've gradually expanded the fermentation capacity of this facility over the years. But apparently as well, they open up the brewery every Saturday for different themed days, so you can go along, you can dress up, you can see some art, listen to some local music, and try some of the Cerveja Dádiva beers. So hopefully that's something I can do at some point in the future. But one of the interesting things about this company is that they pride themselves on being inclusive, and they try to promote women in the brewing industry. They employ around 40 different people, and around half of these people are women, and they're involved in all aspects of the business, from brewing to sales to marketing, whatever. Women are involved in there. But Luisa is also very active in a lot of the female brewers groups in Brazil as well, which is great to see. As of October 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 180 different kinds of beers, lots of different styles, IPAs, sour beers, imperial stouts and things like this. And they're also brewing some cider these days as well, from what I understand. But apparently, the brewery have produced a blonde ale that uses only Brazilian hops, and they have some small plantations in Rio Grande do Sul and Serra de Martiquena, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So that is one I would love to try, because, you know, trying hops from different countries that you haven't had before is pretty good. And of course, South America, Latin America, whatever we want to call it, is a very untapped market in that way. So if the Brazilians and the Argentines and stuff are producing hops, that is something I would love to see. But the name of the brewery, Dádiva, Dádiva translates into English as gift, and apparently they chose the dragonfly as their symbol because they say it's a symbol of peace and prosperity, which is what they want to have in their kind of local area and, you know, for the world, of course. So yeah, a nice little bit of symbolism there in their name. And as I said to you before, the beers that I've had from this brewery have been pretty damn good, actually. So yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Cerveja or Cervejaria Dádiva for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can check out the different the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about the different beers, or you can check out some of the other reviews that I've done from these guys in the past. But yeah, let's crack on and see what this beer is all about. So just to tell you a wee bit about it before we open it up, this one is a 10% Russian Imperial Stout. It contains a coffee blend from Fazenda Ambiental in Fortaleza, and they have some American oak in the base here. So I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't figure this out, whether they've added some American oak chips into the beer or whether they've you know, aged it in some kind of American oak barrel. But you can tell a little bit from the flavour, because, you know, if it's oak chips, you tend to get a wee bit more dryness out of them. So we need to examine that when we actually taste the beer. But I'll let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. The can has been sweating a little bit because it's been in the fridge. But this is a 350 milliliter can, and I forget exactly how much I paid for this beer. I forget where I got this one, actually, to be honest with you. But a 350 milliliter can, Cerveja Dádiva, true batch number 2, 10% American oak and coffee Russian Imperial Stout. So yeah, should be pretty nice. You can see on the side here, they also have this symbol, which I would like to show you. This one right here, which I believe is one of the Brazilian organisations for, like, you know, independent brewers, something like this. So take a wee look at that if you do happen to get a can of this beer for yourself. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. I kind of need this one. I've been a bit sleepy today, so an Imperial coffee stout is most definitely a good way to go. But let's get this out and we'll see how we get on. And I have to say, just from looking at that pour, one of the things that never ceases to amaze me, particularly with the Brazilian Imperial Stouts, is just how black they get these things. You know, the blackness of these Brazilian Imperial coffee stout, or Imperial Stouts generally, is just crazy. Black as night, this beer. But anyway, before the head disappears, I think it's fair to say that this beer poured with about a 2/3 finger of a frothy, very dark tan head. That is going to fade away gradually though, but you can see, just look at the bubbles on this. Very, very small bubbles toward the bottom and slightly bigger ones. You know, they kind of get slightly bigger the further up on the glass that you go. But this beer, for sure, black as night. If I shine the light through this one, it is dark outside now, so I can't really use the natural light. This one is black as night. This has got to be a double or triple mash Imperial Stout for sure. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on, 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, the length of your wort boil, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar is caramelised, thus you get a darker colour of beer. Big Imperial Stouts like this tend to have very long wort boils, and that will play a role, but when you've got black malt in there, it's arguable how much of a role that variable will play. But the barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer too. But again, when it's a black beer like this one, it is debatable how much of a role that is actually going to play when it comes to determining the colour of your beer. But in terms of what you would expect from an Imperial Stout, the colour of this one is pretty damn impressive. This is one of the blackest Imperial Stouts that I've ever come across. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the bottom of the glass there, and a couple of little ones just going up toward the bottom of that head there. But incidentally, the head has just faded away to be a very nice kind of thin foamy layer. So let's take a closer look at the aroma of this one then and see what we get. But I can tell you just from the little whiff I've had, it smells pretty damn awesome. Oh. Yeah, this beer is pretty damn ridiculous. Yeah, beautiful smelling beer. Yeah, as I've explained in numerous Imperial Coffee Stout reviews before, I absolutely love, I adore the smell that you get from coffee beans in beer. You know, coffee beans are probably the most complex adjunct that you can put in beer. When you grow coffee beans across the world, you've got different water profiles, different soil profiles. They're also affected by the massal, the meters above sea level at which you grow them. So you can get like, you know, earthy notes, really floral and aromatic sort of things, citrusy character, red fruits. Coffee beans are just, you know, insane with the level of diversity that they have. And they said, of course, this coffee was a blend from a roastery in Fortaleza. But it smells lovely. So yeah, I mean, as you would expect when it's an American oak Imperial Coffee Stout, you've got that lovely woody backbone to it, so you can smell the American oak in there. There's a little touch of vanilla to it, but what I would say is that the woody backbone of this beer is quite dry, which to me indicates that it's oak chips rather than being an oak barrel that this beer is aged in, because otherwise you'd get a lot of smoothness in there and you'd also get a little bit more of the vanilla character out of the beer. But yeah, but the aroma out of this is absolutely lovely. I mean, on top of that oaky backbone, there's a little bit of a kind of roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust for sure. Yeah, roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust, some really nice kind of rye bready characters in there as well. Yeah, roasty bread crust, rye bready notes for sure. A little bit of a more kind of brown wholemeal bready character, and then on top of that there's little elements of kind of chocolate as well, and there's some brown sugar also. So I mean, further back on the nose you're getting that sort of 70-80% cocoa chocolate out of the beer, but further forward there is a little element of a kind of, you know, 40-50% more milky type chocolate in there, 40-50% cocoa. But the interesting thing for me with this is that the brown sugars are they have a little bit of toastiness to them, but they do have a nice little bit of an oily sweetness in there. So yeah, there's a little bit of toasty brown sugar in there, there's a little bit of kind of oily sweetness to them, but you don't have such a big treacly molasses character in this beer, which is quite interesting. You know, when it comes to using long wort boils and stuff like that, it tends to give you a little bit of a leathery character to the brown sugars. You really don't get so much of that in this beer. So I suspect that this one is like maybe a double or triple mash, but it hasn't been boiled all that long, because yeah, the brown sugars are still quite sweet in this one. But of course, behind the chocolate and behind the brown sugar, you do have one or two little subtleties. There's a bit of nuttiness in there as well. But of course, we haven't really mentioned the coffee beans yet. So the coffee beans for me are quite interesting in this one. Yeah, so the coffee beans for me, they've got a lovely brightness to them. You've got a good little bit of like an aromatic quality there. There's a little bit of a smooth kind of earthy roast. So you've got a lovely little bit of a smoother earthy roast in this one. But on top of that, you've got quite a rich aromaticity, and those two elements of the coffee beans just merge together really well. There's a little element of citrusy character, but also some nice red fruity notes at the same time. yeah, the way that it goes together in that sense is really nice. But the coffee beans, it's interesting because this beer does have a good little bit of, it has got a good little bit of kind of complexity to it, but at the same time, the main notes, when it's called American Oak and coffee, Russian Imperial Stout, it kind of gives you that. And the fact that it's got the roasty, toasty, well-fired backbone to it, that's what makes the Russian Imperial Stout. It gives you everything you'd kind of expect, but the coffee bean and the complexity of it just adds that wee bit more depth to it. So yeah, a little bit of everything going on in this one. Yeah, the way that this beer goes together, I think, is really, really nice. So yeah, malty side of this beer is pretty awesome. Let's look at the hoppy and the fruity side then before we actually taste the beer. So hoppy side of this beer, there's not too much going on in there. You've got a little bit of earthiness, you have got a little bit of a floral character, but there's also just a wee touch of an oily floral note, and also some nice grassy characters in there. So yeah, I mean, the thing is as well, like I said, I suspect this beer is a little bit older. It does say Validade 0922, so I might actually be drinking this beer a month or two out of date. I have to say that, if that's what that means. But yeah, this beer is a little bit, it has been in the can for at least a year, something like that, maybe a little bit longer. So most of the hoppy character, I think, has dropped out of it, but there is a little bit of floral note to it, there is a little bit of grassiness in there, but yeah, that has mainly faded away. One of the other things I'd point out about this beer is you do get a little bit of like a chocolate brownie, kladdkaka, Swedish chocolate cake type note. You do get a little bit of that to this one, but on top of that, you have got some lovely fruity notes. I mean, there's a bit of juicy plum and a sort of more oily fig for me, and a wee bit of like a blackberry blackcurrant. I don't quite get the kind of sharper raisins out of this beer that you can sometimes get from the hops. But regardless, the aroma of this one is very, very nice. And I'm wondering though, it says Validade 09 2022, so this beer may well be slightly out of date when I'm actually going to review it for you, but it's an Imperial Stout, we don't have to care that much. So yeah, aroma wise, it is pretty nice. I'm just very curious to try it now and see what we have. So yeah, let's leave it at that for the aroma. As I always say, though, take a bit of time to enjoy that before you get stuck in. So this one is True, batch number 2 from Cervejaria Dádiva in Sao Paulo in Brazil. Let's get stuck into this one. A 10% American Oak and coffee Russian Imperial Stout. Slanja, skål, cheers, or as they say in Portuguese, felicidades. Oh yeah. I'm just going to say that straight away, that is pretty awesome. The balance that this beer has is really very interesting. I think that's beautifully done. I mean, it's so smooth and so silky. The thing that's going to strike you about this beer already is just how thick and smooth it is, and that's reinforcing to me the idea that this may well be like a double or triple mash Imperial Stout. I really would not be surprised by that. But that is very, very nicely done. It kind of reinforces the idea to me that the Brazilians really know what they're doing when it comes to craft beer. So yeah, need to go down there and visit some of these places for sure. So, yeah, flavour and aroma wise, beautiful beer. One of this, in terms of it being an RIS, it's very, very smooth. So definitely one of the smoother beers I've come across within the RIS category. But that's not a reason to knock this beer at all. This is really, really nicely done. So huge, huge thumbs up to Cerveja Dádiva for this. This is awesome. Let's try and break this down and just describe it for you a wee bit more then. So, middle third of your palate then. Backbone of the beer. You do absolutely get a little bit of that kind of oaky, woody malt base to this one, and you can feel that there. It does give you a degree of smoothness, and as you move toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you get a little touch of the vanilla in there, but you can kind of tell from a bit of the American oak in this case really shows a bit of dryness, and for me that signifies that it's oak chips rather than an oak barrel, in fairness, because if it was an oak barrel you'd get a lot more smoothness out of the wood, and you'd also have just a little bit of like spirit residue or something like this. So I'm pretty sure this one is a I'm pretty sure that this one is using oak chips rather than just than just a barrel or something like that. But yeah, I think that covers the woody backbone of the beer. So, on top of that, you do get a little bit of the roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust character, and that is one of the definitions of the fact of it being a Russian Imperial Stout, and that comes out a little bit later on. But yeah, flavour-wise, this beer is really, really rich. It's one of these, you know, I would say that the Brazilian Imperial Stouts are always very thick and very just, you know, full of flavour. Very difficult to beat that, actually. Even these Brazilian Imperial Stouts even give the Scandinavian, the Nordic ones, a run for the money, and I've, you know, talked about how good the Nordic ones are for years, but these Brazilian ones really push them, I will say. But yeah, on top of that woody character, lovely roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust. You've got a little bit of an almost kind of rye bready character on top of that, and then you've got some more kind of wholemeal brown bready notes. But the bready character you get in this beer, it's very, very rich and just very almost very oily in a way, actually, which isn't surprising at all. So you've got these lovely layers: wood, well-fired bread crust, rye bread, brown bread, and then on top of that you start to get some of the kind of cocoa chocolatey flavours out of the beer. So yeah, on top of that, as I said, you've got a little bit of the kind of chocolatey notes coming out of the beer. So you've got a kind of gradient on that middle third of your palate. So on top of the bread, toward the back of that middle third of your palate, you get this sort of higher 70-80% cocoa chocolate. But then as you move further forward toward the front of the middle third of your palate, it gradually gets more milky, and you get about a 40% cocoa chocolate there toward the front. There are one or two little nutty flavours come out underneath that, which is kind of interesting. But then on top of the chocolatey layer, you start to get the brown sugars out of this beer, and that again is quite interesting. So the kind of bready layer makes an almost cup in the middle. You've got that layer of chocolate kind of sitting in it, then the brown sugars just sit and kind of fill that kind of bready cup that you get in the middle of your palate. So let's focus on those brown sugars for the moment. We'll start from the top and go sort of down and out. So in the dead centre of your palate with this beer, there is like a big oily treacly molasses note in there. But then yeah, as you move further out from that, it's a little bit sweeter and more caramelly. And like I said, I don't think this beer's had particularly long a wort boil, because the brown sugars are not leathery, definitely not. But in the dead centre of your palate, big oily treacly notes, a little bit of a sweet caramel, and then underneath that you do get a little hint of a leathery note to it, but it actually becomes more like a kind of toasty, caramelly, brown sugary sort of thing. And maybe as you push towards the extremities of that middle third of your palate, you'll get a wee touch of a McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing. So that's worth pointing out as well. Yeah, I think that covers the majority of that middle third of your palate, and of course this is where the complexity of the beer lies in a big, you know, Russian Imperial coffee stout like this. But if you move forward beyond that to the front of that middle third of the palate, you start to get a kind of sweeter chocolate brownie type thing, but as you go back on the palate, you start to get the same kind of thing, but you can feel the coffee beans kind of mixing in with that. So for me, the coffee beans very much sit in that border region between middle and back third of your palate there. So let's just look at the kind of flavours we're getting from those coffee beans on their own. So yeah, the coffee beans in this one for me, it's kind of like I described in the flavour as well. They've actually got like a very rich, almost like brandy soaked red fruit, so you get a bit of that oily, plummy kind of character out of them. Underneath that, you've got a lovely smooth earthy roast and a bit of aromaticity as well. But yeah, lovely smooth earthy roast, little bit of aromaticity in there, and yeah, the kind of red fruity character on top of that. The further you go into the aftertaste, you get the floral notes coming out. You also get the kind of smooth earthiness and the kind of red fruity characters as well. But yeah, the way that this beer goes about its business, I think, is very, very nice. The way that coffee bean just complements everything is really good as well. So you've got that cakey, coffee cake sort of thing in there as well. Let's focus on the back third of the palate then before we look at other things. So the woody base of the beer gets a little bit drier the further back on the palate you go. On top of that, you can feel the roasty bread crust, and again it's a little bit drier and a bit more bitter. Remember, more bitter flavours come out further back on the palate, sweeter flavours come out further forward. But then you get a more dense brown bready character in there, like a rye bread, and that is of course taller, and you can feel the sort of coffee bean cakey sort of thing just merging over the top of that, which is really nice as well. So yeah, you've got this whole more kind of just taller flavour on the back third of your palate too, which is great. Above all of that though, you get some of the more airy yeasty characteristics, and it is very much like an airy brown bready sort of thing in there. You've got a little bit of brown sugar in there too, but yeah, a kind of more airy bready character on the back third of your palate, but you can certainly feel that the flavour is absolutely taller. So on the further back you go on that front third of your palate, you can feel the flavour's taller. Then as you come further forward, the flavour's just squashed together that little bit more, and you get all that, you know, those complex flavours that we were talking about. But as I say, the way that this beer fits together is absolutely beautiful, and it's one of the most smooth and silky coffee stouts that I can think I've come across in quite a wee while. Let's focus on the hoppy and the fruity side of this beer then, just to look at that. But we also have to remember this beer might well be a year or maybe even more old, so it might have smoothened out quite a bit. So, hoppy side of the beer then, and again this is very smooth. Back corners of the palate, you have got a little bit of earthiness there. As you move further forward, teeny bit of herbal character, but then yeah, you get this kind of oily but quite tame floral note coming out of it. There's a teeny little bit of a bright floral note in the front corners of the palate, but then yeah, round the front curve of the tongue, it's lighter and more grassy, and you have this oily, grassy character to it as well. But yeah, the way that this beer goes together in that particular regard is really, really nice. Yeah, so big thumbs up to me, or thumbs up from me in that regard. Not thumbs up to me, that's big-headed. But yeah, the hoppy side of this beer is really nice and smooth, and it complements everything else really well. Let's focus on the front third of the palate and the fruity flavours then. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again you get that sort of really thick chocolate brownie build-up. Then the base of the front third of the palate is nice and smooth and woody, but again, yeah, you get a little bit of that chocolate brownie sitting there, and then you get the nice oily bubble with the juicy fruity esters from the hops just rolling their way out on top of that. So yeah, let's focus on that for the moment. So, on top of that kind of layer, the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting. It's actually very similar to what I was picking out in the Aroma. So when you take the beer in, you don't really get a little bit of that, you don't really get that kind of raisiny sharpness that you sometimes get from the beer. At the back of the front third of your palate, there is a little bit of a kind of datey, you know, dried character to it. You've got some oily plums in there, but a bit of dried prune as well. So quite a bit of dried fruity character at the back of that front third of your palate. But as you move further forward, it kind of develops to be a more, it really does develop a little bit more of a kind of oily figgy, yeah, a kind of oily figgy base, which I do quite like. And then as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, you get the slightly sweeter fruits. So let's just look at that. Yeah, on the front half of that front third of your palate, you've definitely got the juicier aspects of the fig, then you get the black currants in the base, and on top of that you just get that sweeter like blackberry note which lingers into the aftertaste too. But in the aftertaste, the woody dryness is pushing out. You almost get a slightly tobacco-y type flavour out of this one as well. And I say that having never smoked in my life, but the flavour reminds me of the kind of dryness and sweetness you get from tobacco. But you definitely get some of that. You get the coffee coming out, the aromaticity and the roastiness of the coffee is lingering there. And then, yeah, you've got all the sweeter aspects too and the oily fruity notes. So for me, this is one of these beers that's very, very complex, but I think it just goes together absolutely beautifully. So has my approval for sure. Let's round off the review then with the mouthfeel. I think we've said everything we need to about the flavour of this beer. Absolutely, this is a full-bodied beer. The carbonation is very smooth. It's a mix of oily and silky actually. I think that's definitely fair to say. So, yeah, definitely a mix of kind of oily and silky. In terms of IBUs, it's a bit difficult to place this one. I think this might be about 50-ish IBUs. You've got a bit of bitterness coming from the coffee, a little bit from the hops, and also a bit from the malt base. So it's a bit difficult to distinguish that because the beer is, and in fairness as well, the beer is really oily and thick and kind of sweet on top of that. So a wee bit hard to say, but I think about maybe 50 IBUs. But like I say, the malt base has a bit of dryness to it. It's got a big sort of oily, silky sweetness to it. And yeah, it just goes together really well. And the fruity side of this beer is big and oily and sweet too. And the sweetness kind of develops the further into the aftertaste that you go with this beer as well. But needless to say, this is a beautiful, beautiful beer. And it is definitely worth trying if you get the chance. I think we've caught this one maybe just at the perfect age. So, pardon me, saying this one goes out of date, if that indeed is what Validade 0922 means. Certainly not. I think it tastes absolutely beautiful at this point in time. So I'd be curious to try a slightly fresher version of this and see how it compares. But as it stands, this one was absolutely lovely. So certainly has my approval. And yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. So yeah, this was the true batch number 2, a 10% American oak and coffee Russian Imperial Stout from Cervejaria Dádiva in Sao Paulo in Brazil. Awesome beer. Certainly keeps up with the standard of beer that I've seen from Brazil thus far. So yeah, let's leave it there. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Cervejaria Dádiva as well. We will be returning to Brazil fairly soon for more reviews. I think we've got another 4 beers from Brazil sitting in the cupboard that we're going to work our way through. But yeah, give me some other beer and brewery recommendations as always, and I'll see you guys very soon. Check out my social media, check out Cervejaria Dádiva's social media, and I'll catch you guys in another review very shortly. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.